Hello friends, and welcome to me reading the 5th installment of my book, Doll Girl Meets Dead Guy. Since this is the 5th part, I'm just going to get right into it. Chapter 26. On the first day of the new week, Sorla asked Wrath for the morning off, wore Grau's knife at her waist under a cloak, and took a very purposeful walk to Door's apothecary, with a basket of pastry, many of them now stale, in her arm. She hadn't had much of a chance to see the city, since she was working all the time and spent her days off writing long letters home, tidying up her room, and reading cookbooks. Lioness wasn't exactly bustling anymore, but the broad and sparsely populated royal shopping districts made her just as nervous as crowds. She glanced at the shop windows, showing off spring dresses, hair ornaments, half-length spring capes embroidered with violets and robins, glittering perfume bottles and boxes of candy. None of it tempted her purse, which she had in any case left home due to fears of getting mugged. All Sorla wanted was to know what had happened to Door, and she was starting to get quite worried. Before long, she knew she was in the Vendiri Ashi because all the houses were mostly colorless. Although most of them weren't actually painted black because she supposed that would make them very hot in summer, she could feel them straining to become true shadows as soon as night fell. They were all white, gray, and black with some accents of purple and silver. Since they didn't seem to care for colors, fashionable houses expressed themselves with an excess of trim work, patterned roofs of slate, elaborate iron gates, door knockers, offering boxes for the ancestors, and so on. This must be it. The sign stated, "Tonden and Family Apothecary." The ground floor was light gray stucco with black shutters punched with cutouts in the shape of bottles of healing tonic, and a black door with a peaked top. The upper story was dark wood with a very sharp roof line and dark purple trim work, spiked almost like icicles, or dripping blood. Bells jingled above her at the door, announcing her presence. Door looked up from the counter. He was dressed in all black as usual, except for an apron of cream linen, and his sleeves were rolled up above his gloves, exposing his strong forearms. He was carefully measuring something, but he stopped as soon as he saw her, and put down the bottle and the tiny spoon. He rolled his sleeves down, and she could tell he was trying not to look embarrassed that she'd seen them. "Where have you been?" Sorla dumped the heaping basket of pastry on the counter. "Are you eating? Did you want me to come?" A hint of irritation in his voice was mirrored by his heavily furrowed brow. "I thought you requested to have me out of your business, and I got the message. I'm certainly not one to push myself on others." "What are you talking about?" "You didn't want me to accompany you to see the general anymore." "No, it was the general who didn't want to see you, and he barely wants to see me either. I thought Euston and I had come to some understanding, but this message came right after your visit to Prince Seldon. You already told me you didn't want me there. You can't blame me for thinking you asked Seldon to come up with a polite excuse to get me to leave you alone." No, it isn't like that. I made you all of this food." "You're too kind. Thank you." He still seemed distant. "But I've been forcing myself to eat normal food and—" He paused, and it was clear how miserable this normal food was tasting. "Well, it's about time I got back independence anyway. I'm a working man, not a prince. I can't rely on you to feed me." "I don't mind." "Don't you? You didn't want to be my chef. You made that clear," he said. "Even if I just take a little of what you make for General Froscar. I mean, how uncouth is that?" He added, "It's all right, Sorla, really. I understand that I have to eat and it might be unpleasant, but it's only 5 minutes of the day, at least if you choke it down fast." He got back to the measuring as he spoke. She wasn't sure what to say. She felt silly demanding he come to eat her food. He's probably right. It wasn't a very practical arrangement for him either, I'm sure. And if I have to leave, if General Froscar dies, that's the end of that, unless I found work at a Vendiri bakery. I could, but if the war turns, I might as well go back to Mayrin and Feyrin anyway. She wasn't sure why the idea of it gave her such an unfinished feeling. She took in the apothecary, a clean and appealing shop with broad wooden counters, dark wooden floors, and shelves painted white with forest green trimming. At least the Vendiri seemed to allow more color in their interiors. They were lined with bottles similar to a potion shop, but the scent was distinctly herbal. The apothecary's trade was a little more stodgy, certainly, just using herbal recipes passed down along generations rather than all the experimentation potion makers got into. But she could tell this was Dor's place. The way flour-dusted tables and baking ovens was her place. She was used to him looking more like a lost, broken soldier wandering alone through the world. Now she had to readjust her idea of him. He looked very comfortable here. "Well, these are still for you anyway," she said, "and your shop is very nice. You look like you're doing well." "Yes," he said. He took the basket, set it aside, and then took out an oat cake. "Those are actually the oldest," Sorla said, "and not very good. I was uncharacteristically distracted when I made them." He took a bite over her warnings. He had this look on his face like he wanted to say something, but he wasn't saying a word. "You know, I do have extras, and there's no shame in stopping by once in a while for them," Sorla said. "I'd rather they not go to waste." That didn't seem to soothe him. "How is Euston doing?" "Not that well. I'm meeting his best friend's wife next week to see if she knows of anyone close to him." "Lady Vinavora?" "Yes. She's cripplingly shy, I've heard. I'm surprised." "Have you met her?" "No, I've met her husband, Captain Elmara." "Have you? What was he like?" "He was the one who gathered us up and said he wanted our initiative to be maiming, not killing. He had spoken to Lord Tellon and Otare, and they both noticed the colonites were more distressed by the maimed than the dead. A calculating man, but affable." "Prince Seldon told me we're losing," she whispered. "As in, the king and queen might agree to terms of surrender, and the colonites would have plenty to say in those terms, I assume. I don't know what will become of Finarlem then. I don't know if anyone here would make it a priority to protect us. She trailed off. She was scared. Of course. What was the point of telling the man she'd yelled at for trying to protect her? "I would make it a priority," he said. Plainly, his dark eyes earnest, but not asking for anything in return. A shiver went through her. "I'm sorry," she said hastily. "I wasn't fishing for that sort of response." "I know," he said. As was so often the case with Dor, she wished he would say more. What did he mean by that exactly? She was tempted to try and read his emotions, but that didn't seem right. Or necessary, really, because you can feel it, can't you? Dor is not like Seldon or Reuven. It isn't about what he says, but what he doesn't say. He doesn't cover up what he really feels with jokes, or gloss over me, or constantly remind me that I'm a poor Finarlem. She trusted him in a way she hadn't felt with any other man. "Maybe you'd like to go with me," Sorla said impulsively. She hated that he had ever thought she was the one who didn't want him to come around anymore. "I don't know if I should," he said after a heavy pause. "If she's shy, I don't think my presence will help, and I don't think it would put me in a great mood to see their grand house and Lady Vinavora tucked away from the world." "Do you blame Captain Elmara for his strategy?" "I just thought I was enlisting to tend to our wounded with my herbs and tonics. I didn't want to leave men maimed and crying for help." "The Daramons you maimed were also my enslavers." "Sorla, I apologize. The colonites are my enemy too, and what they've done is shameful, but I died beside one of them, and I kept hearing him cry for his mother. I didn't kill him. The same blast got us both, but I blinded him, so he died in darkness. All I know of him is the sound of his fear and the feeling of my own fear mixed up together. I think their culture is wrong, but I don't think their souls are worse than ours." "But their souls made that culture," she murmured. "They had such splendid things, like fancy soap and photographs. Oh, I wanted a photograph. But all those splendid things and nothing but cruelty." She didn't want to back down, even though she understood how awful that moment must have been. "I carried a knife with me here, and I walked fast," she continued, "because I know there are people who could sell me to the colonites for good money, and once I was across their borders I would never be free again. You know it too, because you told me not to walk around the way I could in my neighborhood back home. I don't really care if every last colonite loses his eyes and his hands both, but some of them are just kids." "The kids," she snarled, "are just as bad. I could tell you a thing or two about their kids." She shook her head. "Never mind. I understand. I didn't mean to argue about this. I have it handled. The visit to Lady Vinavora, I mean." She flung herself back out the door, feeling as if she had a whole thunderstorm inside her chest, with crackling and booming and heavy gray rain. She still felt entirely in the right. She always carried the fear of being a Finarlem and somehow ending up back in the lands where she was trapped and alone. It was a part of her the way breathing was for flesh and blood people, she imagined. And being a servant for hire there, she felt she had seen every sort of Daramon there was. Some cruel, some nice, all of them unified in seeing her as an inferior being. Faerun was one of the few who didn't, and he'd lost every bit of his old life over it. If the Colonites won this war, she knew it would be bad for Finarlem. At best, the Miralem would insist that all of the Finarlem who were in safe territory now would continue to have freedom, but slave traders would prowl the river and grow increasingly emboldened. Who would stop them? If the Miralem lost the war already, would they stir it up again over that? They had mixed feelings about Finarlem themselves. Still, she realized that thinking an entire race of people had wicked souls was not much different than their justifications for mistreating her. And she had never killed or maimed anyone. She certainly felt she could kill someone, but no one seemed to come back from the battlefields the same. We always seem to get into an argument one way or another. Well, I am usually the one to start it, aren't I? But I keep coming back. She thought of him at the counter, working away with bottles and measuring spoons, scale and ledgers around him, the clean apron, and those forearms. And then she thought of him bleeding out on a battlefield, unable to get up anymore, listening to the cries of this other dying man, looking at the sky until his last breath strangled out of his lungs and his eyes went blank. It felt impossible, but it had actually happened, and she might never have met him at all if his friends hadn't saved his life. She had rushed away so quickly that the shop was already out of sight, but she looked back anyway. She kept walking away, even as she realized that even though he kept irritating her, even though he wasn't a prince, and even though she was too proud to go back to the apothecary and start the conversation over again, I don't think it's Prince Seldon I have feelings for. Chapter 27. I missed her. Una was horrified when she caught Dor eating a tart at the shop counter just after he locked the doors for the day. I wanted to see her. You were so engrossed by that book Vari gave you, eh? Stop saying it like that. It's such an excellent book. Ugh. I can't believe that ridiculous boy thought to give it to me. If he comes back alive, I don't know what I'll do. I don't want to owe him anything. He might be different when he returns, and I have to credit him for courage when you know his family didn't even want him to go. Courage, yes, so courageous that he had to buy a potion to calm his nerves, and I suppose he also brought a fainting couch to the battle. But enough about him. What was Sorla here for? Just to visit you? No, she just had extras. He tried not to talk with his mouth full, but he had been choking down the bare minimum for days, and now he had a bounty of delicious food. That's really all. I'm not sure I believe it. Stop trying to create dramas where none exist, he said, hypocritically. Una had missed quite the show, as he had run the gamut of emotions when Sorla was here, and for the grand finale sent her running out all upset. He felt bad for getting into it when he knew that Finarlem could never truly relax, and no matter how talented and deserving Sorla was, she had to work much harder than a flesh and blood person to prove herself. Of course she's going to be sensitive about it, you stupid oaf. I don't believe you, Una said. You talk about her a lot. Every night this week she's come up in dinner conversation, and not always very naturally. Yesterday I said something about my mattress sagging, and you started talking about how you and Sorla found Silk. Well, you were talking about having trouble sleeping, and we weren't able to sleep because of Silk. Oh, she said, her voice withering enough to wilt the spring flowers. Who else am I going to talk about besides Sorla? Everyone else is still gone. You could call on some of my friends. You could enjoy being one of the few bachelors in the neighborhood. Everyone will just ignore me the minute the other guys come back. Not Brindy. She's always thought you were cute, and she hates kids. Brindy. He made a face. What's wrong with her? I don't know. She's always saying things are delicious. Non-food things. I don't want to be referred to as delicious. Oh, she doesn't say that anymore. I mean, she's 19 now. She's gotten really good at the flute, too, and she has beautiful hair. And I like kids, he said. Maybe I can't have any now, but I don't want to be with someone who is delighted about it. Brindy isn't a mannerless child. She isn't going to gloat over it. I was just pointing out that she won't be disappointed either. But I know none of that matters because you are thinking of Sorla, wondering how you can bring Sorla up in conversation. eating Sorla's pastry in a state of transcendence. Okay, stop. Yes, she is more appealing to me than Brindy could ever be. So why don't you invite her in for dinner? You know we have too much. And she must have come near the end of the workday. We got into a fight again. Again? She always seems to be irritated at me. This time I just stepped in it. It's been hard to reckon with the things I saw on the battlefield and the things I did. It haunts me, but Sorla... Well, I didn't think about how she'd been enslaved by the colonites. She didn't think I should be sorry for fighting with all we have. We were both thinking back on painful memories, and they didn't mix well. Could you apologize, or does it feel like something you can't apologize for? I'm not sure it's that sort of situation. We have a lot of those. Other times, she'll get mad at me for trying to warn her about Prince Seldon or protect her from some physical danger. I know I have no place to tell her what to do, but she really should be careful with Seldon, so I wouldn't apologize for that either. So you expect you'll be squabbling all the time. Sounds about right. Their parents were definitely deeply compatible in some ways, but just as prone to snapping at each other. You just need to patch it up enough to see her again, right? Una suggested. A simple way to state a complicated problem. She invited me to see Lady Vinavora with her, and I said no. That was where it went downhill. I have some opinions about Captain Elmara. His tactics were absolutely ruthless. Their weapons are just as horrific, Una said thoughtfully. You know what I think truly bothers you is that they wanted you to take your personal skills that you had worked hard on and use them to hurt people instead. As soon as our parents let you work in the shop, you liked mixing and fixing, as Feyrin would say. You'd look so proud when you prepared a concoction to heal a terrible wound, or restore sight, or lift a curse. To ask you to take everything you know and hurt people instead, how can you put that aside and cause that sort of pain instead? It's a part of you. You're a wise little sister sometimes. Sometimes. She smiled in the serene way that made her look like their mother. Well, I know, because I used to be so envious that you loved the family business. I know everyone wants me to love it too, including me. Instead, you went away, and I was here, filling in your shoes, badly. You love books, he said. Speaking of which, if Vari is gone, his job must be open, and you don't even have to work with him anymore. Have you inquired? Sort of, but not really. You need me, don't you? Do I look like I do? If you could run this place without me, I can damn sure run it without you. Oh, very true. Don't rub it in. Okay, I'll see if it's still open tomorrow, and you should do something about Sorla. Don't just let that slip you by. Maybe, he groaned, but courtship is not my forte. Tell her the dog missed her. Yeah, right. Chapter 28. The dog really missed you. Dor stood in the entryway of the bakery, and both he and the dog were soaked at the edges. The dog missed me so much today that you had to walk a mile in this weather. Sorla had been interrupted in the middle of getting ready for her meeting with Lady Vinavora, coming downstairs in half-buttoned boots when Wrath told her she had a visitor. Silk was going nuts at the sight of her, barking excitedly and straining against her leash. Sorla came close enough to get her hands slathered in excited dog tongue. I have to get going, she said, but I have saved a pile of pastry for you. Wrath can pick it up. She glanced behind her and backed up into one of the chairs in the entry, tugging on the tedious buttons with the button hook. She would never wear these if it wasn't raining. Dor tightened Silk's leash so she couldn't stick her nose into Sorla's business. I found out today is the day you're seeing Lady Vinavora. I realize I uninvited myself already, and not gracefully, but... She is expecting me by myself, Sorla said. She was already nervous, and Finarlem had to be careful in the rain, and a whole week had passed before she could even get this meeting. Meanwhile, Euston was more dull and depressed every day. Her month to save him was already half over. She spotted the carriage drawing up at the end of the alley and quickly put on her hooded raincoat, buttoning it to her neck and pulling the hood far forward. That must be for me. He sloughed off his own jacket of black wool, and underneath he just had on a black shirt, the sort that pulled over the head, and a plain collar that fit around the neck and could be fastened with one button. He hadn't bothered with the button. She froze, surprised at this sudden undressing, and smelled the sharp herbal scent of him that was quite pleasing. "Silk didn't miss you," he said. "I did. And when you asked me to come with you, I should have just said yes." "You missed me?" "Yes, I know it might not be reciprocated, but if you'll tolerate me, I do know how to speak the language of the upper classes here. I won't take the lead, but I'll be there if you want me to step in. If she's cold to you, I might be able to extract some information by playing on her thank you for your service sympathies." "I was thinking along those lines the other day." An extra buzz joined in her general nervousness. "You can come. Why did you take your coat off?" "To hold it over you, of course." "Oh, I mean, I have one." "Will Wrath mind if I leave Silk here?" he asked. "She's already done her business and gotten in a lot of exercise." "I'll check." Sorla dashed back to the kitchen, clutching her side to keep her chunk of rib in place, and led off with, "I promise I won't ask again, but Dor needs to leave his dog, just for a minute, or, well, maybe an hour." "You think I mind having a dog around? Don't even worry about it. Send her in here." Sorla called Silk in, and she trotted right over to Wrath as if she'd known him for years, while he started scratching her ears and making ridiculous lovey sounds. Sorla saw fur flying everywhere and thought about hair and the royal pastries, but she decided to just let it go. The rain had been coming down steadily for hours, a good spring soak that the gardens were drinking up. Sorla was excited for the explosion of flowers, but the timing was terrible. Only her head, forearms, and hands were truly waterproof, and once water penetrated down to the stuffing, it was all over. First, she'd smell like wet wool, then she'd start looking lumpy, and if it really got bad, her limbs would get too heavy to move well. The alley looked very long just now. Dor held his coat over her before they left the shelter of the building. "But you'll be soaked," she protested. "It's fine. Can't catch a deathly cold, at least." "Okay, I'm going." "Go right ahead." She started running, and he managed to keep up with her, although he was really forcing his bad leg. He opened the carriage and swept her in, climbing up beside her but hugging the side so he wouldn't drip on her. He pulled the wet coat over his shoulders. "I can't catch cold either," she said. "And you're absolutely sopping. What a mess. Lady Vinavora isn't expecting you at all, much less as a man who crawled right out of the harbor." He fished a handkerchief out and tried to wipe his face with it, but it was soaked too. He tried to get the water out of his eyes, at least. "No helping it. You didn't have to protect me. I already have a thick coat." "You looked like you didn't trust it." "I do hate rain. Well, I like it from inside, but I hate going out in it." He tousled his hair, trying to dry it out, and she noticed how his shirt really clung to his shoulders and chest now, when he'd always been so covered up. "It's a warm rain, at least," he said. She had the impression that he never wanted anyone to see his body ever again, but he had still taken off his coat for her. Now that they were sandwiched in the small carriage, she was much more aware of his flesh and blood physicality, the way his skin was so supple and his musculature so firm. Even the most well-made Finarlem didn't have the weight and strength of flesh and blood. This was what Mayron couldn't help mourning a little when Faerun's real body died. But Dor was taller and broader than Grau, and now she couldn't seem to notice anything else. Although she was sure she would find many scars on his skin, this didn't bother her at all. In fact, fates help her, she was intrigued to see them. "Silk didn't miss you. I did." Sorla felt a sense of disembodiment. She couldn't believe this was actually happening to her. She had just realized that she missed Dor when he didn't come around, and now this. Yes, he irritated her sometimes. They didn't always understand the other's point of view. But she still missed him, and she trusted him. It was like Mayron said, wasn't it? Not everyone has to agree with you, but they do need to be worthy of your trust. Unlike when Seldon got on his knees before her, she wasn't terrified. Well, at least not in a bad way, exactly. As lashings of rain hit the windows of the carriage, panic beat inside Sorla's chest. He shoved back his wet hair. Then he looked at his very wet gloves. His face was pale, his dark lashes clumped with rain. What do I say now? What do I do? I don't even have a real woman's body. If something more were to come of this... She could feel the warmth of him. She lifted her face, about to attempt some meaningful conversation. The carriage stopped in front of a modestly sized but elegant home. She quickly looked away and threw open the door, her hands jittery. She had no map for what to do from here. Other girls didn't talk to her about these things. What should she say? Well, for now, it would have to be nothing at all. Chapter 29. Dora watched Sorla nearly fling her feet onto the ground ahead of him. She seemed nervous, but she couldn't be as nervous as he was. I told her how I felt, and she's barely said anything in return. But she had allowed him to shield her from the rain without protest, and coming from her, that had to mean something, didn't it? The carriage had stopped under an overhang that protected the entrance of the house, keeping them out of the rain. Sorla led the way to the front door and knocked. He had to get his head on the task at hand. Sorla still had some hope she could save Euston and, well, he wasn't going to crush that hope, although it seemed extremely unlikely. "Hello, you must be Miss Thano." The female servant, wearing a simple gray dress, greeted them at the door. She looked nervous. If Lady Vinivora never had visitors, this probably wasn't a normal part of her duties. She paused a moment over Sorla and another moment over Dor. "Is this your manservant? The request said it would just be a lady." "This is Dor," Sorla said. "He's an apothecary and a soldier and a friend of mine." "Well, welcome. Come and get warm by the fire." The woman led them into a dim, cluttered entryway, hardly the grand house Dor expected, and then into a cozy room with a crackling fire, several cats balled up on a rug, a knitting basket with a sweater in progress spilling over it, papers cluttering the table by the fire, and more houseplants than he thought possible in one room. The woman took the chair by the knitting and gestured for them to help themselves to any of the others, then she jumped back up. Oh, wait, maybe I should offer you drinks? Tea? Coffee? Or should it be hard stuff? Trova isn't here to advise me. I'm so sorry. I never have guests." A blush rose to her cheeks as she looked around the room as if the furniture might whisper some stage directions. This is Lady Vinivora? He relaxed slightly as he realized Captain Elmara had such a humble home and unpretentious wife. It shone a better light on the captain that at least he wasn't coming home from his captain's quarters to unfettered luxury and a spoiled lady. Among the ranks, while General Froscar was well loved for his kindness, Elmara was considered to be strict and restrained, although honorable. "We don't need anything," Sorla said. "Well, then again, maybe tea would warm Dor up. He got so wet. I'd be happy to help you with it." "I can make tea. Yes, I'd be happy to. Everything is very humble here. I'm sure Prince Seldon told you I don't have guests. I know I should, but it's so much easier to not. Trova's always gone, so he hardly cares, and when he is home, he'd rather have me to himself anyway." "This is a lovely, comfortable home," Sorla said, immediately putting Lady Vinivora at ease. "And you're right, it is easier not to have guests, although I'm surprised you aren't lonely." "No, I just don't really get lonely. And I really wanted to say no to having you over, but it was the Crown Prince himself, so I couldn't refuse." "I'm sorry to impose on you, then," Sorla said. No, I actually don't mind. Not exactly. I just don't know what to do or say. It's not your fault, just my own failings." "Shall I help you with the tea?" Sorla took her hand gently, soothing her. "And we'll just ask you a few questions and then leave you to a quiet evening." Lady Vinivora led her to the kitchen, still prattling nervously. Dor knew he was already falling hopelessly in love with the girl, and his opinion was biased, but she was certainly good at putting people at ease. He stood by the fire a moment, trying to dry out, noticing that the table was covered in letters. They were certainly from Elmara to his wife, and she must keep them there as a reminder of his absent voice. Even at a glance, Dor could see that the handwriting was tidy and precise, but without flourish, just like the captain, and was sprinkled with the old pictographic characters that only the very well-educated would use. "I will never forgive what they have done, but killing them does no good at all. They will be reborn as quickly as we kill them, with no reflection whatsoever. Nothing would bring me more pleasure than to rob each man of an entire generation of his eyes and hands, to see them unable even to grope, utterly reliant on the wives and daughters they have stomped into submission, forced to reckon with the fact that they are petty, vulnerable, useless little men. It is not easy nor pleasant to cut off their bits, or I'd do that too. I know you'd rather have a love letter, but all I can think today is that the Darmon women cannot possibly know the sort of love we share." Dor jerked his eyes away as he heard Sorla and Lady Vinavora returning. He wished he hadn't snooped. The words were no surprise, but he couldn't bring himself to wish for such individual punishment on each man of an entire generation, no matter what they had done as a culture. But he also realized maybe it was because he was a Daramon. Now, Seldon told me in his invitation to call on you that you've been briefed on the condition of General Froskar, Sorla was saying, as she walked back in with 3 teacups on a silver tray. She handed one with an owl painted on it to Dor. Yes, poor man. I can't believe it. It's just so dreadful, and it must be awful for him. I don't know how I could be of any help at all. I haven't ever spent much time with him. Of course, he and Trova are close. I think the only thing that might pull him from the brink is love, Sorla said. It sounds like he doesn't have any family that close. Has he never been in love? Maybe some childhood friend he hasn't seen in ages? A girl he loved and pushed away because of his military career? Anything. He loves fighting for his people. Trova always said that Euston had the biggest heart of any man he'd ever known. I haven't seen him since this revival, but I can't believe that Euston won't go on for the people. So everyone keeps telling me, Sorla said, but he won't. Coming back from the dead is a dark place at first, Dor said. I know this from personal experience, unfortunately. You need a single hand to pull you up, and Euston is being kept like a prisoner. I know they wanted to keep his condition secret, but it was the worst thing to do. So you are also revived. But the necromancers who brought him back, wouldn't they have known what to do? I don't know. Chances are they're off on the front lines again with your husband now. Clearly, if they did give advice, it wasn't followed. They might have taken it for granted that he would recover like a Vendiri would. But Vendiri have close families who would celebrate their return, not shun the undead person. In fact, if there is any trouble with Vendiri families, it's that they don't want to acknowledge how hard it is to come back. As Dor was telling this to Lady Vinavora, he realized he was also processing his own experience for the first time. Everyone told him he was looking good or asked him how he felt, but in such a way that he knew no one wanted an honest answer. What a tragedy. Lady Vinavora shook her head. To put such a good man through this, all for nothing, to lose him twice. Trova always comments on how Euston doesn't take much interest in courtship or sex, as if he didn't feel that sort of love. I imagine the ladies fall all over him, but he's never been seen taking one anywhere. He will dance a bit, but it's only because he loves music. Music, Sorla said. He doesn't have any music. Maybe we could... I can't imagine music would be enough for him to turn his entire mood around in a week or two, Dor said. Yes, it's worth a try, but... Sorla rubbed her head. Are you sure his lack of interest isn't because of, I don't know, a forbidden affair? Euston! Lady Vinavora looked incredulous. Trova would probably laugh at the very idea. Well, I have to try. I'm at wit's end. I still keep thinking of this moment when he said I reminded him of someone. Has he ever been acquainted with a Finarlum? I know this is really reaching, but I also know it's taboo for the royal families to have a romance with Finarlum. Well, he cared about Finarlum like he cares about the downtrodden of any kind, from what I understand. I do know he rescued... Lady Vinavora frowned. It was years ago. I can't imagine this person would really matter. Sorla seized on it. A Finarlum girl he rescued? Something like that? Yes, many years ago, when they were younger, Euston did rescue a Finarlum who had been escaping north and caught by river bandits and badly abused. He's a good telepathic healer, Euston, and he nursed the Finarlum back to health for a few weeks. Trova was very upset about what happened to the poor soul. It was one of those days when he came home cursing, wishing all Daramons, oh, forgive me, I mean Colonites, would suffer. I can only imagine what the bandits would do to the poor thing, but then maybe their entire life had been the same. It was a secret, but Trova said they were an own Loxa. Sorla exchanged the briefest glance with Dor. She kept chewing her nail, betraying her tension and excitement. Maybe this was nothing at all, but it also might explain everything. Chapter 30. Sorla knew that Dor had been skeptical about this quest, and so had she for that matter, but what options did she have? However, now she could tell he was impressed. She had hit on something. The intimacy of telepathically healing someone for weeks. Sorla knew what that entailed, although she was not at all capable of doing it. Telepathic healers had to get very close to their patients to take on their pain before dispelling it. It was impossible to imagine that experience had not affected Houston. And Onloxa. They were the rarest type of Finarlem concubine, only offered at one house in Atlantis. Onloxa were created to be dual-sexed. When Finarlem were created, they were assigned a sex at birth based on the readings of their soul, and sometimes it was changed when it seemed to be wrong later. But in the rare instance that a young concubine-to-be seemed to have a perfect androgynous charm that could appeal equally to men and women, they were offered to the house of Onloxa in Atlantis. Sorla knew Onloxa were extremely expensive, and this Finarlem must have been some exceedingly wealthy person's treasure. Sorla shuddered to even speculate about their lives beyond that. In her years of servitude, she was happiest when her masters paid little attention to her. This gave her plenty of space to feel ownership of her own soul. "Are you all right?" Dor asked her, and she realized she had let a heavy pause unfold. "Yes," Sorla said. "I just find it so terrifying to think of being an expensive Finarlem concubine. If someone owned you like that for so much money, well, and river pirates with an Onloxa, that's also quite terrifying to ponder." Sorla's innards twisted as she realized she was going to have to find this person. She wasn't very comfortable with Finarlem like that. It wasn't easy for her to talk about, but Mayrin had occasionally expressed the same sentiment, an odd guilt at having escaped the worst sorts of fate. "Do you know anything more about them?" she asked, brushing all this aside to get back to business. "Their name, or where they might be now?" "His name was Arn. Well, Houston said he was known as male in the camp. I'm not sure there is anything to it. It just seemed like typical Houston, giving someone a hand up and then moving on to the next mission." Well, maybe that is nothing, but..." "Houston is an excellent telepath, isn't he?" Dor asked. "Yes, level 9 rank." "So he could hide his feelings if he really wanted to," Dor said. "Oh yes," Lady Venivora said. "Does he normally nurse people back to health personally for weeks?" Sorla asked. "No, not that I know of," Lady Venivora admitted. "I just know that Houston and Trova were particularly angered by what happened to Arn. Houston was part of the boarding party on the pirate ship, and apparently he was in a downright rampage over it. I think everything about it just went against his sense of morality. The exploitative nature of Onloxa and concubines in general, Arn trying to escape and the pirates snatching him up instead. I must say, I am sure having Arn as a lover would have been far from Houston's mind. He would have seen him as someone to heal and protect." "Houston has about a week left," Sorla said, "and the chances of anything are thin, but he does need someone, anyone who can reach him. Maybe because he helped Arn in that way, he would respond to seeing him again. I was just thinking what Trova would say. You'd bring Arn there, and it's for nothing, but word gets out and Houston dies bathed in scandal, but..." Lady Venivora shrugged. "I don't care. That's why I stay here. I absolutely hate court dramas and prying eyes. Arn can stay with me if needed, and they can all whisper about both of us. Assuming he's quiet, of course, because I won't know how to amuse anyone. And that we can find him. No family name, I'm sure," Dor said. "I don't think that part will be hard at all," Sorla said. "Every Finarlem, sooner or later, has to go to a Finarlem maker for repairs. And in Lioness, there is only one name in Finarlem repair. I guess I'll finally get that rib fixed. Among other things." Chapter 31. There was no time to waste now. Houston had 6 days. Sorla could feel the weight of impending tragedy pressing on her. Everything would change once Houston was gone. No, not once he's gone. If he's gone. You can't lose hope until you pulled the last thread. Even Wrath seemed like he wasn't his usual good-natured self. She'd given him the gist of the story without offering details into Houston or Arn's private affairs, just that she had one slim lead on a person who might help. Wrath had an ever-growing pile of orders now that it was spring and the royals were coming out of the slow winter season. He was buried under them, muttering and cursing under them, and had taken to having a running conversation with Blueberry about his stress levels. "It's too much, Bloob. It's just too much. Of course I'll manage. We all will, eh? I know." You have a toy to lose and find again. That's keeping you busy. Sorla had to hire a carriage as the shop was in a slightly iffy part of town where most Finarlem and Lioness lived. Most of them still did the same work they had done in the Daramon lands. Sex work, service work, and dirty and dangerous jobs. Sorla's first job in her town was at a butcher shop. She had gotten plenty of satisfaction wielding a cleaver, but it wasn't exactly illustrious, and despite her best efforts, she sometimes got blood seeped into her stuffing. The Finarlem repair shop didn't reflect the general poverty of its clients, however. Just the sight of it suggested that the future would be ever brighter. It occupied an entire building of 3 stories, and the storefront was spacious and clean, with a few plush couches and model figures on display. Sorla immediately noticed that the display included the usual 6-foot-tall male body and 5-foot-tall female body, but also one in between. Stars above, do they actually make skeletons the height of a normal woman now? Hello, can I help you? A man stepped up from the workroom, which was visible behind him through double doors, bustling with employees readying orders. Are you Mr. Trinivell? She asked. He fit the description, a flesh-and-blood man with light reddish hair. He wore a long light blue tunic with loose sleeves, and his demeanor was gentle, as if he was used to soothing traumatized clients. Yes, indeed. How can I help you? I'm Sorla Thano, Grau and Velsa's daughter. Grau and Velsa's daughter? Wonderful. I've just had a letter from your father recently, in fact. His work is so exciting. Having a potion maker of that caliber in our corner really could change everything. He is always working very hard on potions, Sorla said. A little surprised to hear Grau described that way, because she suspected back home that everyone liked him but thought he was slightly insane. He'd spent years trying to crack formulas to make Finarlem hair grow, to waterproof skin cheaply, and other ambitious goals, with only minor victories. When he reluctantly attended a party, he didn't have much else to make conversation about. We sell a lot of the spells he developed to make skin taste sweet, but of course it's the strength and waterproofing spells I'm really hoping for. Anyway, I'm sure you're tired of hearing about him back home already. Not really, Sorla laughed. I think you're the first person I've met who is this interested. No wonder he writes you so often. Really? How depressing. But then why am I not surprised? No one ever does expect much from Finarlem. We'll show them yet. I hope so. She wondered how Mr. Trinivell, a flesh-and-blood Miralem, had gotten so interested, but she had more important things to worry over. My first business today is actually to find a Finarlem named Arn. Arn. They may have come here at some point in the past several years and own Loxa. Arn! Oh, yes, I know Arn. They were about the finest Finarlem I've ever seen. I hope they're doing all right. She felt a spark of increased hope that Euston might have cared for Arn in some way. They were probably exceedingly beautiful and charming. In fact, it probably wouldn't be very good for Arn to see Euston again, the same way I just know Seldon could never really share a life with me, but Dor could. Where is Arn now? She would have to deal with that problem later. They're a musician, world class at playing the Bastille. I'm sure if you asked at the concert halls, you would find Arn in no time. Music, of course. Thank you. This is exactly the information I needed. Glad I could help. Is there anything I can do for you, or are you just on a mission? Well, I have a broken rib. Ah, an easy fix. We could do that now, or would you rather make an appointment for later? How much are those skeletons? Oh, you like the new model, eh? I'm thrilled we can finally offer a good mid-size. Well, you're probably looking at 100 elan, all in, skin and stuffing, before upgrades. But I'll do it for 70 for Grau's daughter. Huh. Sorla did have nearly that much. Well, it's a lot of money just to be taller, and I need, some other things, maybe. She was hoping he got the point without her having to spell it out. You can think on it. I have more skeletons on order, and you do lose a smidge of coordination. 5 feet is really kind of a sweet spot. But I also think metal skeletons will be coming into general use when the war settles down, and then you don't have that problem as much. You really get superior strength and speed with metal. So if you adjust to the height now, when we have metal upgrades in 5 years, let's say, then it's an easy swap. And I've heard there's some really interesting possibilities with new materials. Okay, well, I'll think about it, Sorla repeated. I can see why Feyrin likes writing to you. And I to him. I hope your parents come visit again sometime. Stop by again soon. Best of luck finding Arn. Thank you, I will. As Mr. Trinivale turned away, she also made her way to the door. Ugh, why didn't I say anything? Maybe Dora and I will drive each other crazy before we ever get that far, but I don't want to deal with this when it's overdue. She felt quite alone with her problems. Flesh and blood people never had to navigate buying their own lady bits, and she wasn't even sure Mayrin would understand. She shook it off, refusing to get distracted. She should just go to the apothecary and enlist Dora to help her find Arn. The carriage took her to the apothecary, and from its safe confines she saw his neighborhood from a different direction. Now she saw the breathtakingly macabre temple, which was decorated in a siding of bones and skulls. She audibly gasped at the sight of it. A boulevard leading to the temple was guarded by statues of their stately death gods in hooded robes and draping sleeves, with a strip of green park for promenading. It was a nice day, and women were out strolling in black veils, dark gowns, and gloves. They were really pretty odd. She wondered what it would be like to live here. The apothecary door was open to the fresh air, and Sorla sent the driver on his way. Dora was inside looking over a book and drinking ice water with mint. When he saw her, he seemed to brighten, his dark eyes hopeful. Sorla, come in. I'm just trying to look up the potion for swamp fever. Haven't made that one in ages. We don't have swamps. Rolovan just came back from the front. He was one of my old mates, and he's in one piece, too. Swamp fever, I can handle. That's great. Do you need to finish it immediately? Because I have a lead on Arn, the Onloxa. They're a musician, and Mr. Trinivale thinks we'll find them at the concert halls, but I could use an escort. He immediately started capping bottles and then gave the counter a brief wipe. Of course, that quest would take you to some interesting neighborhoods. I'll just close up for the afternoon, he said, grabbing a walking stick with a handle that looked like an animal skull. As far as music halls, I have a good idea where to go. We can walk to the Scarlet first. New cane, she said. It gives you a sophisticated air. Yes, he grimaced. I didn't want a cane, but the limp isn't going away. At least they had wolf skulls. My regiment called ourselves the Doom Wolves, which in hindsight just sounds silly, but anyway, it's also a family emblem. And Lord Gara needs a cane, and he's the most powerful Vendiri of all, so I guess I shouldn't get too self-conscious. But is your limp a little better, or am I imagining it? I also got a thicker sole on my right boot. It is helping. Still stiff at the hip, but maybe it's still knitting. I'm not sure how long I'll be healing versus, well, this is as good as it gets. Did you get your rib fixed? Gods, is this the conversation of old people already? She laughed. Not yet. Well, they have taller bodies now. They're expensive, but I've always felt like I should be taller my whole life. How much taller? 6 inches. So you'd come up about here. He touched his shoulder. That does seem beneficial. Is it hard to get used to a whole new body? Well, it won't be worse than the jump from kid to adult. That was over a foot, and my first adult body was so clunky. That's how I feel about my second adult body. He chuckled. Well, I worked with it. It'll be all right. I can reach things on top shelves if I get that new skeleton. You should go ahead and do it then, he said. I noticed that your workplace has as many shelves as mine. They walked and talked, and he told her about his friend with the swamp fever, how he was a good sort of friend to have around, a quiet and honorable guy who was also up for anything. Very easygoing for a Vendiri. I think he'll really like you. I'm glad you have friends. I took you for a loner. Not untrue, but I do have friends. I don't need them around constantly, but you can't really help having friends here. It's a close-knit community. Beneath the easygoing conversation, she was painfully aware of his presence and the things that remained unsaid. She still felt she ought to tell him something. She didn't want him to think she was only using him as an unpaid bodyguard. But the words wouldn't come, and now it was a sunny day, which made the things he'd said to her in the rain with his coat over her seem like she may have imagined some of them. They reached the Scarlet. By day, the venue was fairly quiet, but a woman cleaning the floors directed her to a manager's office. And the manager, a woman with immediate bluntness in her eyes and a plain, almost masculine-styled tunic, immediately said she knew Arn, of course. What do you want with him? She asked, not unfriendly, but careful. Now Sorla wasn't sure what to say, because the truth was she wasn't sure if she was putting Arn in harm's way. She couldn't guess at the fallout if Houston did care for them, but she wasn't naive enough to think there wouldn't be any. "It's confidential," Sorla said, "but General Froskar is dying. He wanted to know if Arn was all right." The lie stung her lips, but it was out. She didn't know how else to manage this, although she might just be making a bad situation worse. "Oh no, I see. I know Arn has mentioned that the great general was who got him across the river." "Yes." "I'll give you his address. He should be home, though maybe sleeping at this time of day." Sorla noted that Arn was still presenting himself as male, instead of the dual-gender signifier Vi, which could mean a shift of identity or simply not wanting to complicate his outer life. "Do you know what you'll do if Houston does have some reaction to Arn?" Dora asked, low enough that only Sorla would hear, as the woman wrote down the address. "No, I really don't. It's feeling a little more all the time like something might come of this, isn't it? But if it did..." "Well, all Seldon really asked was for you to coax Houston back to life. If his reputation takes a huge hit afterward, well..." "But it's Arn I'm worried about. He certainly didn't ask to star in a royal scandal." "That is true. I was so focused on Houston, but you're quite right. Arn is much more vulnerable. I think we need to tell him how dire the situation is, and if your hunch is true, he still has to decide if Houston's life means anything to him. We can't drag him there." "No, that wouldn't persuade Houston anyway. This will only work if they both mean something to the other." Chapter 32. Sorla could hear the beautiful notes from the open windows of the terraced house. This must be it. She straightened herself up almost onto her tiptoes, clenched and unclenched her fists, and finally banged on the simple knocker. The music stopped, a door shut somewhere upstairs, heard through open windows. Shortly thereafter, a curtain fluttered beside the door. Sorla didn't catch any glimpse of the inhabitant, but clearly she had been scoped out. There was a pause, and then the door opened. "Fans? I don't usually sign autographs at home, but I suppose I will make an exception for you, sister." The voice had the languid Atlantean accent, too low for a woman, too feminine for a man, musical and somewhat practiced, just right for the appearance of Arn, who leaned in the doorway, already holding a quill pen. "No, not fans. Well, maybe now, because your music sounded lovely," Sorla said, a little dumbstruck. Arn went beyond whatever her imagination had conjured. Thick hair of a silvery white framed his face, and his eyes were ice blue with a silver rim around the iris. His large eyes were framed with permanent black eyeliner in the male Daramon fashion, nose small and sharp. He was that exactly medium height that Sorla wished to be herself, very lithe, with no breasts but with some curve to his hips. He had very fine hands with long fingers and silver fingernails. Although her mind very much wanted to categorize bits of him as male or female, in truth, almost every bit of him was perfectly balanced between masculine and feminine, and the only thing that broke the spell was mere fashion. "Not fans." He shrugged. "Well, don't I seem the arrogant ass now? What is your business?" "I've been following a thread," Sorla said. "We might not have any business at all, but I wanted to tell you, if it means anything to you, that General Froskar is dying." It did mean something. That was immediately clear. Arn's breezy expression fell flat. "I heard he was sick." "He has actually been brought back from the dead, but he's refusing all measures to keep him alive. He's sort of withering away, both in body and soul. No one really visits him, and it seems the only thing that might save him is to see someone he has a connection with. I don't know if that's you, but I do know it isn't anyone else. His family doesn't know his condition, and they'd be upset if they did. He only has days left." "Come in." Arn's hand collapsed from the doorframe, and he turned back into the room, then started pacing, dispensing with any niceties. "Go on and shut the door. It needs a good pull at the end." He rubbed his forehead. "You know our history?" "Not really, except that he saved you from river pirates and let you recover with him for a little while. That was the story, anyway." "I think of him every day." Arn drew both hands through his hair. We'll say nothing of what went on before he found me. You can imagine. You might imagine that no one ever reacts to me like I'm just a normal person. Yes, Sorla said, you're strikingly beautiful. I can imagine that leads to a lot of trouble. Well, all I can say about Houston is that he did just treat me like a normal person. So much so that at first I kept wondering if he wasn't right in the head. But no, he just took good care of me. I was terrified of telepaths invading my mind, and he is powerful in that regard, but he very gently found out what I needed to heal and gave it to me without ever wanting anything in return. I kept waiting for the other side of things, the caveat, the extracted promise, the favor owed. But there was nothing. He was just a sweetheart. I've met a few in this world since, but he still stands above the rest of them. Do you think you meant anything to him? Sorla winced at the personal question. I'm sorry, I don't know how to say it. Basically, we promised him that we'd help him die, again, in just a few days. I'm looking for anything that might coax him to stay. The royal family is on the brink of capitulating to the demands of the colonites, and I'm worried for all Finarlem and everyone else. Oh, gods, what a loaded question. I don't even know you people. Arn now flopped flat onto a chair, legs hanging off the cushion in two rigid lines. How do you know, Houston? I'm working at the Royal Magical Bake Shop, and I can make pastries that taste good to the undead because apparently dying messes up your sense of taste, at least for a while. So I've been feeding him, and this is my friend Dor. My sister and I have been making the undead tonic for the general, Dor said. Gods, poor Houston. I can't bear thinking of him in that state. He did save my life, so I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to save his. I realize it's a loaded situation, Sorla said. I'll go. Arn got up again and glanced over his clothes, apparently deeming them acceptable, then grabbed a short coat from a peg by the door. Right now, I presume. That's fine, Sorla said. They're expecting me soon. I'll get us a carriage, Dor said. He went ahead, watching for a cab with his arm ready to hail, while Arn gave Sorla a wry, sideways look. You seem to have a good place in the world. What is your name? Sorla Thano. The Thanos were your captors. No, my adoptive father. Good. Arn rubbed his chin. Did you escape young then? I was 14. So, not extremely young. Concubine. House servant, and then servant for hire. So you really know nothing of that world. No. My mother was a concubine, but never, well, she was trained as a concubine, but my father bought her, and he never made her do anything, and now he's a Finarlem too. That's a new one. Arn seemed to take this in for a minute, but didn't offer her any of his own life history in return, which was fine by her. She didn't really want to consider it. Dor successfully caught the attention of a snug little carriage for hire, and they piled into it, Arn sprawling across 2 seats before Dor and Sorla could even consider the arrangement. Sorla felt Dor's body close against her hip. I do think Houston will have some reaction to my presence, Arn said. I don't know how he's felt over the past few years, or whether it will be enough, but while I was recuperating and he was drawing me back to life, we had a lot of very long conversations. It felt charmingly platonic. It was hard for me to wrap my head around him at first. I thought, he must treat everyone this way, and I don't mean anything to him, but he also seemed lonely. I think he shared things with me that he didn't usually share. And occasionally an anonymous person will send me a bit of money, or I'll swear I see his face in the crowd. In short, well, we'll see. Sorla nibbled at her nails, caught herself, and forced her hands back to her lap. But you didn't stay in contact. We certainly do live in different spheres, Arn said. And we weren't lovers. There was no reason to stay close exactly. Maybe this won't be enough. You seem young, Arn said, turning the conversation away from himself again. 22. Young. And your fellow? He's... That awkward phrasing again. I am also young, if that's what you're asking, Dor said with a hint of humor. You're quiet. More often than not. That's good. When I see a Finarlum and a flesh and blood person together and the Finarlum does more of the talking, it's a good sign because most of us are told to shut up. We're friends, Sorla stammered, and then she was immediately pierced with regret when she felt the subtle shift in Dor's mood. He didn't meet her eyes and his glove squeezed the silver wolf skull. Well, that is what Euston and I are as well, Arn said. He fell into silence then, and Sorla wished she had a bag of mending or something, anything to occupy her hands. She kept fumbling things with Dor, and Arn intimidated her completely. He was beautiful and confusing, and definitely older than she was. Whatever his history was, it seemed to ripple off of him. Sorla recognized that fragile dignity of a person who had survived something. She felt it in herself sometimes, but not like that. As they came closer to the royal quarter, Arn finally broke the silence. "And what happens if he did love me?" he asked. "I don't know." Guilt twisted Sorla's innards. "I've thought about that, but I don't have a good answer. The prince..." "What did he say?" Sorla said as much to Dor as to Arn. "The prince has hinted at an interest in me and..." "Oh, really? You do get more interesting by the minute, Sorla." "Well," she tucked a strand of hair back behind her ear. "I think the prince is a good man in general and very lonely, maybe like Euston, but I know the only thing he could give me is a life where he's the only thing in it. I'm afraid he thinks I'd be happy just kept in his chamber somewhere with gifts and visits from him." Arn shivered with disgust. "You would not." "And I know it. I never would. He isn't the man I love." She glanced at Dor. His eyes flicked sideways briefly. "I'm done giving up any part of myself for a lover, Euston or anyone else," Arn said. "I wouldn't ask you to," Sorla said, "even if that means he chooses to die. I have a lot on the line, but I wouldn't ever ask someone else to give up their freedom." "I'm glad to hear that." Arn's pale eyes met hers with a glint of steel. "We'll see what comes of it soon. Maybe nothing at all." Sorla had a lot of practice in hiding her nerves, but she certainly felt it balling up inside her when they reached the side entrance to the palace, where the guards were expecting her, but not Arn. And it was certainly impossible to pretend Arn was not worthy of notice. "Who is this?" the head guard asked, staring him down. "Arn Giryu," he said in that unmistakably foreign accent. "I'm here to pay my respects to the general. I owe him a great debt." Thank goodness he knows how to explain himself. And although Arn neither thrummed with magical power nor looked physically intimidating in the least, it was obvious she wasn't the only one intimidated by his sheer charisma. Of course, Arn was surely getting a telepathic assessment as well. "All right, very well." The guard showed them in. "Gods, it's dark in here," Arn muttered, but as their eyes quickly adjusted from the bright spring day to the shadowed room, they both saw Euston in a state of collapse on the floor. "We're too late." "Euston!" Arn choked out his name and then rushed to his limp body. "Euston, please!" All right, that's it for this installment. Only 2 more installments to go, and I will have read the whole thing. I'm so glad you've been enjoying it. Sorry to leave you on a bit of a cliffhanger this time, but I'll try to get the next installment up next week, fingers crossed, and we're getting into the final stages of the book. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye!